folks. My name is Mike Steele. I'm a writing candidate for sheriff here in Montezuma County. A little more? How's that? With me tonight is my wife, Lori. She and I have been together for about 13 years now. I'm 56 years old. I'll be 57 here in about 3 weeks. I have one daughter, Roni Vaughn. She's a NICU nurse for Kaiser Permanente up in Portland, Oregon, and 2 stepsons. One of them is, he does personal protection for a high-profile family down in Beverly Hills, California. And the other one's a young man still trying to find his path in life. Give you a little bit about my background. I was raised in a very small community in California, Lone Pine, California. I understand one of the kids that I grew up with has relocated here some 30 or 40 years ago, and he and I are about to reunite that childhood friendship. We'll see how that turns out. Lone Pine's a community of about 1,800 people. It's a very rural community. It sits right at the base of Mount Whitney in the high Sierras there in Owens Valley. I graduated from Lone Pine High School, myself and about 20 other kids, I guess. And I was raised in a Western lifestyle. I've hunted and fished and rodeoed all my life, and I still do. I started my law enforcement career in Lone Pine, and about 9 years into that, I transferred down to a very large agency in Southern California and spent the balance of my career there. I'll give you a little background on my law enforcement history. I have over 30 years experience in the criminal justice system, 21 of those directly in law enforcement, another 10 as a business owner. I own a fugitive apprehension agency based in Oklahoma, and we've worked nationwide into Canada and Mexico as well. In my 21 years of service, I've done just about everything that there is to do in that profession. Inyo County is a county just about identical in size to Montezuma County. It has the same size correction facility or detention facility. It has basically the same amount of population of personnel. The only difference is geographically it's spread out considerably more than this county is. So there's multiple substations as opposed to one centrally located substation. During my service with Inyo County, I worked the jail environment there. I worked patrol as well. I also worked investigations in Inyo County. When I transferred down to San Bernardino County Sheriff's, San Bernardino is a very large county, very heavily populated with a very outrageous crime rate. The agency has about 3,500 employees, and it's probably one of the nation's most technologically advanced agencies. I will say that during my stay there, or the balance of my career at San Bernardino County, I had a multitude of responsibilities. I'll kind of run them down to you. Each one of these is in an actual working position as well as a supervisory position. I worked in their jail environment. Population ran about 2,000 inmates, and I also supervised in that environment. I worked the streets down there as a regular patrol officer and also as a supervisor and field training officer. I spent probably 2/3 of my career as a supervisor, if you will, of specialized units. Those units involved street gang task force, crime impact unit, a community-oriented policing team, street narcotics, SWAT, and I ended my career as a homicide detective. To give you an idea of the volume associated with that expertise that I just lined out for you, our homicide unit, all we did were officer-involved shootings, murders, and jail deaths, and we had over 300 call-outs a year. So there's an extensive amount of background there. Excuse me, I'm getting a little cotton mouth there. Having supervised all those various different positions and working them as well, I believe that I've got a very well-rounded law enforcement background. My education is ongoing as most. I've attended a lot of community colleges and one university. I probably have in excess of a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and I have lectured in community college and state university levels, as well as taught extensively at the Sheriff's Training Academy there in San Bernardino as well. After my career was over with, I became a businessman. I've been in business now for 19 years. During that 19-year period of time, I've owned and operated companies with annual gross revenues in excess of the Sheriff's annual budget here. And I've dealt with all the related responsibilities of administering over those companies, such as personnel issues, workers' comp issues, liability issues, anything pertaining to the administering over a business. I've been involved with it the past 19 years. Once I decided that my wife and I were just about done, we wanted to pick a real pretty place with good people and a place that we wanted to be happy to wake up at, to retire and finish the rest of our life. We chose here, and we've been here for, I think we're getting ready to start our 5th year. And we chose it for a multitude of reasons. I think first and foremost, the peace and quiet and the beauty that surrounds each and every one of us as we wake up each morning. I do own a business here in a neighboring county, actually, Dolores County. If you've ever been there, I own the Duff Creek Sinclair. My wife pretty much runs it. We just kind of show up together occasionally. And this is where we want to spend the rest of our lives. We're done. It's been a long road. It's been a tiresome road. But we're very pleased to have called this place our last stop, and that's what our intentions are this time. So having said that, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you as best that I can.
Well, the way we do is, if you have questions, if you get up here and get the line, take your turn. I'll start you off. I want to know why in the world that you're retiring, you want to get from the sheriff's office.
You know, I find that I have an ability to overcome challenges. I have an extensive background in law enforcement and in business. And I actually see that this agency has a very positive direction that it can take in the future, reuniting it with its community, providing the folks of Montezuma County a more professional and kind agency to represent them. And I feel that with my direction, this agency could certainly accomplish that task. I feel the agency needs to be more fiscally responsible, and I also feel that there are some significant personnel issues that need to be addressed and that environment corrected so that folks who work for that agency can enjoy a full and complete successful career right here and eliminate, if not significantly reduce, the massive turnover that's taking place and has been for a while. Sorry.
Politically, it seems strange that you would go the write-in route, and it almost seems as if whether or not your heart is really into this particular race, would it not make more, I would guess if you weren't going to enter into the GOP, which is why you would go in and place yourself on the ballot as an independent or something else, or go ahead and petition to get on the ballot. Going in as a write-in almost seems like, it almost seems like you're not even trying to win this particular race. So give us a little insight into your logic regarding the way you're pursuing this particular race.
It's really not a matter of logic, it's the way that I end up having to do this. The write-in candidacy issue is a very difficult issue to overcome, and I understand that. We tried to do the independent, and we were short by I think, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, something like that, with the deadline dates. And we dealt with Carol Tullis down there at the county off and on for probably 4 or 5 months, trying to get on the ballot in various different ways. And unfortunately, because of the restrictions that are applied to this particular election, this was the only way that I could do it. It's not a matter of whether or not I feel that this is something that's not worthy of my effort. That's far from the truth. It's more about, I must really feel strongly about this to approach it in the manner that I'm required to approach it in. If I had it my way, my name would be on the ballot.
Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
In my mind, I think one of the greatest threats that we face is from an overreaching federal government. And so, my question to you is, where do you stand on that issue? And you heard what I had to say up there about the roads and the Forest Service and BLM closing up the public access in violation of the law. If we as citizens go out there to reopen those roads, where will you be?
Right with
if
you.
you're elected sheriff, where
Yes.
will you be? Will you
Right
be-
with you, but let me try to explain that if I could, Dennis. There's two different ways to approach this issue. I feel one of them is in an administrative business type way, opening up a line of communication with the federal entities that we will be dealing with in the future. And please keep in mind that your elected sheriff can't do this on his own. He needs everybody's participation in this room. He needs the county board, the county commissioners' involvement, and the state legislators to get involved. This is a very complex issue, but in response to your basic question, I'll be right there with you. I enjoy these mountains just as much as anybody else does. And I feel that, well, you said it best yourself. Research has proven that the county is responsible for the roads up there. And so once that gets established throughout the various different entities, whether it be state all the way into the federal, then we'll all be able to share that force in the manner in which it was designed to be shared. And I am supportive of what you're trying to do, very much so.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that you want our help, and I appreciate you being here, but you are the one taking the oath of office, and the Constitution is very specific. The federal government can only own land in 5 areas, and none of them are for forest or BLM. So when you take that oath, how are you going to be able to rectify doing anything but trying to take back the lands since you've taken the oath? If you win.
I'm sorry, sir, just a second. You made a statement about trying to rectify, trying to take back the land. Could you further explain that a little bit for me? What your question is?
Well, Raymond tonight, when they went over Article 1, Section 8, it says the federal government can only own land for forts, docks, arsenals, munitions, and other equal buildings. When you look around at these pretty mountains here, do you see any of those out there?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. The 10th Amendment says that anything not specifically delegated to the Constitution, the federal government cannot do it. So that's the dilemma we're in. How are you going to get to there? I mean, it's nice that we'll be behind you, and trust me, there will be numerous citizens behind you. But you're the one taking the oath,
That's correct.
not the citizens.
Okay, well, with respect to that, sir, my answer to you is simply this. The educational process associated with the findings that are coming to light, or being reaffirmed actually, it's not really a matter of coming to light, but being reaffirmed, as Dennis spoke of earlier, are in and of themselves heading in the proper direction. The sheriff taking the oath of office, as you referred to with the Constitution, is going to do, at least this one is going to do everything that he swears into that oath to do. And please understand that I am very much in favor of keeping these lands, these roads, these forests in the control and usage of the citizens in which they were intended to be used for. With respect to whether or not I'm going to stand up there and get into a gun battle with other citizens who have jobs to do as well as everybody in this room, I would say the answer to that is probably going to be no. I will do, however, everything that the authority of my office affords me the opportunity to do to represent you in the way that you need to be represented and the way that I feel, quite honestly, as it relates to that. Does that answer your question at all, or do you think I'm trying to dance around it? I see the look on your face, and I don't know that you're sure of that.
No, we just want to know how you feel.
That is the way I feel, sir. I very strongly support your feelings in this matter as well, and please understand that.
Thanks for coming tonight, Mike.
Thank you.
You're running on the platform of reunite sheriff's departments and the community, correct? That's what you mentioned.
That's correct, sir.
And you mentioned personnel, dollar cents, spending, and budget. Okay, how are we disconnected from the sheriff's department, or how are you going to reconnect the citizens in Montgomery County to the sheriff's department, please?
I appreciate that. I've got a lot of ideas relative to that. And please understand that as far as I'm concerned, the only way that you can have a successful law enforcement agency is working in unison with the community in which it's there to serve. And here, there seems to be a divide. And I've only witnessed it for about 5 years now, but I've witnessed it in such a clear vision because I guess perhaps my background, I don't know. But you can't have a paramilitary organization in a community such as this. It is disrespectful and it is unproductive. In order to start to change that, because that's what I perceive the current relationship as being, some sort of a superior entity over the people that, in fact, are there to serve, not to, authoritative over, but to serve. I've got several plans in mind. There is a, well, let's start in-house first, with the personnel on the Sheriff's Department. Excuse me. In order for members of that staff to look forward to promoting and advancing in their careers, which everybody who enters into a career like that has visions of doing, one of the requirements that we're going to have in their annual evaluation is self-initiated community involvement, and then a continuing education and a continuing self-initiated training program that the deputy has chosen to implement themselves to better themselves with the community and better themselves within their responsibilities on the department. You'll see these deputies start to interact with the community and after school programs. You'll see them being more involved with the local organizations such as this, the Elks, and etc. And you'll also see the community get more involved with the agency through my implementing of a Reserve Deputy Sheriff program. I think that's a very vital resource that law enforcement has, and I don't see it in place here. I know they have a search and rescue team and a posse, but an actual Reserve Deputy Sheriff program is something that really helps unite the community in with the agency and vice versa. Another key plan that I have is a community-oriented policing strategy. And that is essentially where your sheriff's department will actually become a part of your community. Same way with you. You can walk into those doors, you can expect to converse with anybody that you choose to in there, including myself, any of the staff members there. The community-oriented policing eliminates that paramilitary control body that you're experiencing right now. You won't find law enforcement officers with low-slung weapons, military fatigues tucked into boots, ball caps, reflective glasses. These things are all intimidation things that aren't necessary in rural America. I've worked some of the toughest streets that this country had, and sometimes there's a place for that. Most of the time there's not, and this certainly is not one of those places. The other thing that I would like to see put into play is a citizens offering police support program. It's probably one of the most viable community-related type of programs that are out there, and that's for everyday folks. They come in and they take a non-post certified course of instruction from internal staff, and they get somewhat familiar with the everyday workings of the Sheriff's Department, and then they become a part of the Sheriff's Department as volunteers, and they help us with the everyday non-police tasks. In other words, you don't have to worry about going and getting in a bar fight or having any kind of problems like that. You'll be more involved with going out and doing neighborhood watch programs with folks, going out and meeting various different members of the community, getting input from them, and bringing it back so that we can start working on that relationship and the improvement of it. The other program that I have in store is a citizen review panel. Folks, there's nothing more important than the community having a say in the way their sheriff's department is ran. Folks, this is your sheriff's department. It's not mine. This belongs to you. And unless you have an active part in the day-to-day workings of it, then they're just going to continue to do the way they've been doing. And what I mean by the citizen review panel is I will help put a group of folks who are interested together, and they will sit down, and our first task, if you will be to start reviewing the policies that are in place on the Sheriff's Department and seeing if there's any room for correction or improvement, and then giving information or suggestions as to what they feel those corrections or improvements could be. They would also be directly involved with any citizen complaints. Because quite honestly, folks, if you don't have true transparency, where you know that members of your community are helping address the very issues that cause citizen complaints, you don't really know if they're being dealt with. You don't know if somebody is being called in on the carpet and talked to relative to a citizen's complaint. You have no idea. You can be told that it was addressed, but without a citizen review panel in place, you have absolutely no idea. That's such a vital tool for the sheriff of an agency to have, because it takes away that suspicion. I can honestly say that, well, sure, John Smith got a complaint for being too rough, let's say. Well, what happened to John Smith? Well, let me tell you. I had a citizen review panel and members of my department get together, and we decided that this was either in line, out of line. If it was out of line, these were the necessary steps that we've taken to make sure that it doesn't happen again. There's no sense in a repetitive civil liability issue for this county. This has got to stop. Rural America, you can't afford it. You cannot afford civil lawsuits every time you turn around. It's going to get old, it's going to get expensive. So until we start putting into place tools to correct these issues, nothing's going to change. So those are a few of my ideas to bring the community and the department together. Thank you.
Yes, will you apply or accept federal grants knowing that it's somebody else's money?
No, I will not, sir. I'm sorry. I feel that if I were to take federal grants, all I'm doing is selling out the authority of the citizens of this county to the federal government. I have no desire to do that.
In your budget, you're going to request a piece of equipment like the guy just got for your SWAT team?
I'm sorry. Dexter, I couldn't understand what you said. What did you say?
In your budget, you're going to request money to buy a piece of equipment like the Atlanta County just bought for your SWAT team?
Let me explain to you my philosophy there, folks. I spent 6 years in SWAT. I ran 4 years, I ran an entry team. There are some very extreme conditions where a higher level of training and expertise may be required to diffuse a situation. But I don't know that that would ever happen here. I would hope that it wouldn't. But to answer your question, that's a little on the excessive side, and I think it's kind of disrespectful to the citizens that if I were to do that here, there's absolutely no need for that type of military presence. And I believe that's what I was trying to get across earlier with the reducing or eliminating the paramilitary presence of your law enforcement here.
Well, again, yeah, I'm thankful you're going to reduce that because that would have been one of my questions. But I'll just paraphrase this. I know Dexter doesn't like it too much, but the government schools for the last 50 years have basically been either not teaching or dumbing this down on the Constitution. And I think probably most of the sheriff's deputies, even the ones that you claim, and I don't know, I don't read the papers, so in these civil lawsuits, some people would be better than me at that. But don't you think it'd be good to have classes that teach them the rudimentary elements in the Constitution? And maybe we could stop some of these civil lawsuits from happening, and also the laws that are in accordance with the Constitution, which are legal, so your deputies have a little more understanding of what they're supposed to do.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Let me explain something to you folks. I can stand up here all night long and promise you that I will be constitutionally supportive of everything that you and the folks in this county do. But what good is it going to do me to say that if the men and women that represent me have no working knowledge of the Constitution or have a antiquated knowledge? And what I mean by that is they were taught it way back when and haven't utilized it in any recent period of time. It doesn't do me any good to say, folks, I'll be constitutionally disciplined for this office. If I've got deputies that are out there violating your Fourth Amendment rights, that doesn't do anybody any good. So yes, and thank you so much, because that is one of the very many things that I have every intention of doing. Not only making sure that they're educated as far as the implementation of the Constitution as they go about their day-to-day tasks, but also making certain that they have the various different schools and classes. Now, what I mean by this is that let's take, for instance, let's say the district attorney's office feels that there's an area of expertise that could be taught to the men and women of the Montezuma County Sheriffs that would better enable him and his staff to be more successful in their prosecution or the preparation for trial for prosecution of cases. Well, there's absolutely no reason in the world. Those are very highly educated men and women. I would certainly suggest that they know what they're doing. And there's no reason in the world why I wouldn't invite either Mr. Fures or one of his deputy DAs into my office to give a lecture on search and seizure laws or Miranda laws or anything relative to the safeguard of the Constitution, which ultimately is the only way that a law enforcement investigation can be successfully prosecuted is if the Constitution is adhered to throughout that investigation. Okay?
If, let's say I decided I would like to find a little bit about you and examine your background, number one, would you be willing to give us sort of basic information so we could do a background check on you? And number two, if we did that, would we find something that might be embarrassing?
First of all, yes, I would do that. And second of all, no, there's nothing that's there that's going to be embarrassing. I have given my fingerprints, so I am blue in the face here lately, I've given them to the State Lottery Commission, the CBI for my licensing for my business. I've given them to Carol Tullis's office. I just recently gave them to the college out there, which, by the way, just so you know, and then I'll finish up on that. August 11th starts my post-training here in Colorado. I have what's called an advanced post from the state of California. That's the highest level of post certification that you can acquire based on your education, training, and experience. I can't use it here because I have not been a full-time sworn peace officer for one of the last 3 years. So as a result of that, the Post Commission in Denver has suggested that I go through the basic post certification class out here in Mancos at the college, and I've signed up to do that. Mind you, I've chose to do that on my own. The state allows me a year after I'm put into office to acquire that certification. But quite honestly, folks, I don't think it should be your expense. And for the first year, I can't afford to spend 4.5 months going to school when I should be over here doing the job that you voted me in to do. Thank you so much. You are all right. But yes, you're more than welcome. I'll sit down and help you with it. Okay?
I believe currently the federal agencies, when they come into the county, check with the sheriff. Will you continue that, and how strongly do you feel about that?
I feel it's very important that they check in with the local law enforcement. And in fact, I'm going to ask, I'm going to try to establish a very open and professional line of communication with these federal agencies. And there's several reasons for that. But I think the most important reason is I don't want them to look at me as some sort of a confrontational individual that they feel that they should no longer have any communication with and go around me to conduct whatever business it is that they feel that they have here without my prior knowledge. And if that business involves any sort of law enforcement, then we're going to have a very serious talk. Because I feel strongly that federal agencies, and I have worked with federal agencies in the past, DEA, FBI, Secret Service, all that stuff. I feel very strongly that if there's any law enforcement activity to take place, such as the service of a search warrant or an arrest warrant or something like that, I feel very strongly that my department is the one that needs to make that contact. These people have absolutely no idea who they're talking to or dealing with. They don't know the circumstances behind it. And I truly feel that if we can eliminate or significantly reduce that federal presence within our county boundaries, I think the citizens would learn as we go to protect, or not protect, but to trust us in future encounters such as that. How nice would it be for myself or one of the deputies to walk up and knock on somebody's door that they know and say, "Hey, Joe, these guys want to talk to you," instead of these guys showing up with all of this garb on and kicking in doors and throwing flashbangs and pointing guns at women and children who are most of the time in the house along with the fugitives. So that's the way I feel about that.
Do you feel that your authority exceeds theirs? And what would you tolerate any? You kind of left a little gray area in there, maybe that you wanted them to check with you, but I mean, what will you tolerate from them?
Well, first of all, yes, my authority does exceed theirs in this county. And as far as the toleration is concerned, I think about the only thing that I'm willing to tolerate is an open line of communication and making certain that we are very much a part of whatever it is that they're trying to get accomplished. Now, please understand, if you would, you can't eliminate where some people choose to run and hide. I have chased serial killers all over these United States, and they show up in some of the strangest places. However, if you have that open line of communication with the federal agencies who may very well be pursuing somebody like that, let's say it's one of the FBI's most wanted, for instance, and he or she is hiding up here in the mountains in a cabin. We can't help that. They've probably been pursuing that person for years. And now they've located that person, and now it's their obligation to render that person back into the custody of the courts. And rightfully so. I don't think anybody wants one of the 10 most wanted running around free. I do, however, want that agency to be in contact with me, inform me of their intentions, and allow me to be a very intricate part of that contact. It doesn't mean that I'm going to tell them to go wait in the coffee shop, I'll be back in 2 hours. It means that I'm going to go with you, and we're going to do this together. You're not going to do anything that I feel is out of line, and I'm going to try to reduce any problems that you may have based on perhaps our knowledge of the situation more so than yours. Okay? These are hard. Could you sit down?
You said you felt like your authority exceeded theirs. Why?
Because the sheriff of a county is the law enforcement officer of that county. They're responsible for everything that goes on inside that county. And it's not a matter of whether it exceeds their authority. I will tell you that out of professional courtesy, it does, and they know that. And all the times in the past that I've worked with federal agents, excuse me, there's never been a question about who's in charge or who makes the calls and things like that. It's always, at least in my experience, it's always been the sheriff's department who has done this. It's not like they come in here and think that they're some sort of a superior being and they're just going to push us aside and go do what they want to do. At least the experiences that I've had with them, they're professionals, and they respect the authority of the sheriff over his county.
And he's elected by the people.
Very much so, sir.
That's where his
Very much so.
authority comes from.
Yes, sir.
Well, I heard Mike wanted to ask this, but he asked you didn't. So what would happen if you make a mistake in violation of the law? Who can actually come down and arrest you?
I believe it'll be a combination of Will Furs and a sitting judge. And let me explain to you, first of all, if I make a mistake, I'm going to own it, because I'm not perfect. But as far as breaking laws are concerned, that's something that I would never knowingly do. So I don't know that that will ever be an issue, but I can assure each and every one of you that I am not perfect. And I may make some indecisions, but I can assure you that if I do, I'll darn sure own them. I'm not going to try to cover anything up or blow you full of smoke. If I make a bad decision, I'll stand behind it.
What do you feel is your relationship with the police on the reservation?
You know, I've worked with the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the past. Owens Valley, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, are you? Well, you know that in each community there's a reservation. And out there it's kind of a unique situation. The sheriff has control of the reservation as far as law enforcement is concerned. But if anything serious takes place, Bureau of Indian Affairs will come in, and then as a group we'll work together to bring it to some sort of a resolve. I have a very large desire, quite honestly, to become familiar with and make available to them any resources that they need to effectively do their job on and off the reservation. And please let me explain that to you. There's a lot of times where situations can happen on the reservation, and the persons responsible for those situations may wander off to avoid the contact from the BIA. That's where we would come into play as far as giving them the assistance that they need to carry out their responsibilities. Okay?
I think it was earlier this year, our wonderful local newspaper had an article about you and some kind of a run-in that you had in your bonding business or something. Would you want to go through and kind of tell the audience what that was all about?
I would, sir, and thank you for asking. I've been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. First of all, that wasn't my company. I have owned a bail bond company before, but not that one. That bail bond company was in existence for 6 years prior to me showing up. I was contacted by the owner of that company and asked to utilize my company, which was the Fugitive Apprehension Company in Oklahoma, to manage our fugitive population. That company was a very large company. It had 4 or 5 different satellite offices. And they had a fugitive population that was quite large. And so initially I brought one of my teams, I ran 3 teams throughout the country. I brought one of my teams with myself out to that location for an assessment. Excuse me. After that assessment, we came to the conclusion that the bonds that were being written were not a significantly high-risk type of bond. In other words, they weren't writing a bond for a drug cartel member that just ran back into Mexico, because I don't want to spend the kind of money it takes to chase somebody like that. If a bonding company wants to make those kind of choices, then they need to live with those. However, once we found that they had a responsible writing policy in place, I went ahead and took a contract with that company. And that contract was that I was to manage all of their fugitives. And they probably ran a population of anywhere from 25 to 40 fugitives at a time. So we were pretty busy. And it had gotten to the point to where I was pulling my teams from other parts of the country out to Southern California, because all we were doing were chasing these fugitives. They were everywhere. So I decided to close down one of my teams. I left one active and closed the East Coast team down, if you will, the East Coast. And then I kept a team, and then I stayed in Southern California. And I lived in a little town called Grove, Oklahoma. My daughter, whom I raised by myself, was a junior in high school, and I would fly back and forth from California, back home, back out to California. For 6 years prior to my company's arrival at that bail bond company, the folks that owned that company, they did some pretty underhanded stuff building that company up. This all came to light after the investigation was revealed by law enforcement out there. And quite honestly, they got what they had coming. And I think that they would agree with that. However, my involvement in that situation was nothing more than working in a hostile work environment without any knowledge of it. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. That company had a policy in place. And that policy says that when a phone rang, and if it was an incarcerated individual calling from one of the jails, that you would accept that call, ask them what it is that you could do for them, or that the company could do for them. And if it required bail, you would put a 3-way phone call together between the incarcerated person, a bail agent, and a family member or a loved one to try to arrange for that person's release. This is written policy. And I might add that the jails did nothing to stop these calls. The calls went through uninterrupted or without any problem. And the jail, I might add, profited from that phone call. It's kind of a unique situation. When the investigation came to a surface, or came to a head, if you will, and apparently it had been going on for nearly 2.5 years before I showed up. Pretty extensive investigation. They took and filed charges on, I believe, 21, 22 people. The owners of the company and his immediate family that were responsible for building this company had some pretty serious allegations put against them, and ultimately ended up answering for those. There was probably 6, 8, maybe 10, I never kept count, of everyday common employees that were accused of unlawful solicitation of bail simply by completing that three-way phone call. They had record of me doing 2. I think I did probably 5 or 6. That wasn't my job, but if I was standing in there and those phones were ringing off the hook, I'd pick one up. And ultimately, those three-way phone calls were interpreted. It was never proven, and I don't think it could have been, it was never proven to be unlawful. It was interpreted as being wrong. And their philosophy, when I say they, the investigators' philosophy is that when an office member or an office staff accepted that collect call, because that call costs money, now mind you, you can't call from that jail without it being a long-distance collect call. Because that call costs money, that was somehow financially rewarding an incarcerated individual. It's unlawful to go down to a jail, at least in California. It's unlawful to go down to a jail and put money on an inmate's books. They're afraid that that would generate some internal issues as far as promoting a particular company versus another. And I can understand that. But we're actually talking about three-way phone calls. And so that is what I got wrapped up in, myself and probably about 6 or 8, maybe 10 of the everyday employees there, who had absolutely nothing to do with the criminal misconduct of the building of that company 6 years prior. So it was one of those things where I put myself for the first time in my life in somebody else's environment that I had no control over, and that's what I got out of it. Now I will tell you that that misdemeanor case was ultimately dismissed, but it still didn't keep me from having to go through a troublesome time with a lot of embarrassment, and it's something that I told myself, I promised myself, I would never allow myself in somebody else's environment like that again, because you just don't ever know. That could happen to anybody in this room. It's that simple. Because the folks that were involved with those phone calls had absolutely no idea, myself included, the way that company was built. And it's the way it was built that prompted the investigation. And I think they thought they had a lot more going on there than what they actually did. Because I've been in the criminal justice system for over 30 years, and I saw absolutely no criminal conduct taking place in that place. So I'm assuming, and he told me, the owner of the company told me, that that was way back when they started it, and he apologized, and blah, 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 blah. But the bottom line is that's what it was about. Three-way phone calls. They had 2 of them. I think I did 4, maybe 5, 6 at the most, but they had 2 of them. And so I told them, I said, yes, I did those calls. But I do not feel, and I still don't to this day, that they were somehow criminal. I don't get that part of it. But anyway, the misdemeanor case was ultimately dismissed. Go ahead.
Is there such a thing in your mind as there being some laws that have been passed that you might be, as sheriff, asked to enforce that could be possibly unconstitutional?
Well, I think that there's laws passed on a daily basis that could be unconstitutional. I think we're about lawed to death. I mean, it's getting to the point now to where you can't hardly wake up in the morning and go to work without breaking some sort of law. And I understand how it comes about. It's all about politics, and I never thought I'd be up here saying that, but it's all about politics. It truly is. You take these gun laws, and I know that's a real touchy subject, but I'm just going to touch on it. folks, tragedies happen in this world all the time. And I don't know how many hundreds of murders that I have investigated and supervised investigations on, where people were victimized by something other than firearms. So I have a real issue with that, but because it's such large tragedy that takes place, it automatically becomes a political hot potato. You know, God forbid that multiple people get hurt with firearms. But there's already laws in place that prohibit people from doing those things. And I don't see where it's accomplished anything. So yes, I can see in the future, as well as yesterday and probably even today, that there are laws that are being put in place that may very well be viewed by most of us and perhaps down the road as being unconstitutional.
And if you see that, would you enforce it?
The constitutionality of law is something that is usually determined in a courtroom. I can tell you this, that that's a difficult question because, you know, there are laws that are enacted that are essentially unenforceable. I mean, honestly. For instance, I don't know if it's true here, I can find out and get back with you, but I know in California it's against the law to spit on the sidewalk. Now, could you imagine taking somebody to jail for spitting on the sidewalk? Is that really enforceable? I don't think so. So yes, there are laws that, in my opinion, are not enforceable. And as a result of that, I would say that common sense has got to play a part in this process somewhere. And I would hope that the men and women that work for the Sheriff's Department have plenty of common sense. Yes, sir.
Now, I'm not certain if you're trying to dance around this issue of constitutionality.
Yes, sir.
And I think what a lot of people are trying to get across to you is that it is your responsibility. You take the oath of upholding the Constitution. It is your responsibility. It's not the public. It's not the county commissioners, although they take the same oath of office. It is you that takes that oath. It is your responsibility to know what is constitutional and what is not. And so I think what a lot of people hear is trying to get you to answer, and I can understand politically why you may or may not want to answer it, but are you going to hold the citizens of this county to an unconstitutional law? Or are you going to have the set of cojones to say, no, it's unconstitutional, it is pretend law, and I am not going to subject the citizens of this county to an unconstitutional law. Now, please answer it, or just say, no, I do not want to answer it.
Well, you know, I thought I answered in a roundabout way, but I'll probably make it a little bit more forward so you can understand. You're absolutely right as far as my responsibilities to that oath is concerned. And I will tell you right now that if I feel that there is no constitutionality associated with a particular law that does not appear to be an enforceable law on its foundation, I will not enforce it. Did I just dance around again?
Okay. Okay. Now, follow this. If a law is passed that a bookstore cannot sell books, that is probably unconstitutional. But it's enforceable. So, I get so tired of sheriffs or a lot of these people saying it's unenforceable when it doesn't matter because it can be enforceable, but it's unconstitutional. So I hate this kind of getting involved in enforceability and unconstitutionality. So,
Okay.
can you separate that?
Sure, if you just take that scenario that you just gave me, sir, absolutely not. I would not enforce a law like that a bookstore couldn't sell books. That would be ridiculous.
Okay, but you can see that that's enforceable.
Yes. Hey, Dexter, don't give that back to him. Jerry? Anybody else, folks?
Well, tell you what, why don't you tell us, in closing, of why in the world should we write your name in on the ballot?
And how to spell it,
Yeah, I'll spell it.
Now you're getting real tough.
Well, you do know that if it's in the ballot as a write-in, it has to be correct.
That's correct. However, well, let me address your first question first. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know that there is a better candidate for this position than myself. And I'm going to explain to you why. Running a sheriff's department is not a street cop's job. If you take a street cop mentality and try to run an agency with that, you're going to get exactly what you have. And it's nothing against your incumbent. I'm sure he's done the best he could possibly do. And perhaps his next term would have been better than his first. Running a law enforcement agency is an administrative responsibility. It encompasses a wide range of tasks. Those tasks range all the way from personnel issues to budgetary responsibilities, civil liability issues. It just goes on and on and on. A street cop can't do that. I don't care if he's got 50 years experience. It can't happen. I can tell you that with 32 years in the criminal justice system, there is no way that I could have been a proper administrator for a law enforcement agency until my last 19 years of business. That is where I learned how to be an administrator. That is where I learned to be responsible to my business, to the community that I serve, to my customers, to my potential customers. You can't go to a school and learn how to be a businessman or an administrator. They're the same thing. It just doesn't happen. You've got to experience that. It took me 19 years to get it figured out. And I think I can honestly say that I have sure earned my knots along the way. That's all behind me now. I know how it's done. I understand the responsibilities to each and every one of you that I would take by entering this office. And I can assure each and every one of you that you would not have seen a more professional and fiscally responsible agency representing you in this community as what I can provide for you. If you would afford me the opportunity to prove myself, within the first 12 to 18 months, you're going to see a change in that agency that you can be proud of. The staff of that agency will already start to transition into a more positive and professional representation of you. You will get to be able to experience not a paramilitary attitude that thinks that they're superior than you, ordering you about your life, but yet another member of your community who is there for you when you need them. And they'll be there in such a way that if you're victimized, they can do their job professionally, accurately, to the point to where these courts, the district attorney's office, and every victim in this county has the opportunity to realize satisfaction for that victimization. The district attorney's office. I can assure you, folks, I have tried many, many death sentence cases. And I have done many investigations relative to that, and there's nothing more serious than a death penalty case. that level of expertise can be transitioned right into this agency, and that district attorney over there, heck, he might give you a couple of his paychecks back. His life's going to get a lot easier in that courtroom. If you afford this county an opportunity to move forward in a kind and professional way, allow this agency to transition into you and you into it, it's going to take a while because we're going to have to build some trust along that way, but it can happen. I think that you'll have an agency that you can be very proud of and a law enforcement community that you can be very respectful towards, and vice versa. Now, with respects to the manner in which that you have to vote for me, it's really quite simple. On the ballot, in fact, I have some brochures in the back of the room, just happen to have those, imagine that. In the back of the room, on the back of it, there's instructions, and it shows you how that ballot's going to appear, in the manner in which you have to fill that ballot in order to cast a vote for me in this election. It's really not difficult. I've always thought that the general public is very, very smart. So I think you can handle it. I know I can. So all you have to do is just fill in that bubble, and it'll say write-in, and write my name, and they will accept either Michael Steele or Mike Steele, and anything relatively close. Just don't do Mickey Mouse. Carol told me she would not accept Mickey Mouse, even though I act like that from time to time. But that's the way that it's done. It's very simple. It's not as complex. The only complexity associated with a write-in candidate is the fact that his name or her name does not appear directly printed on that ballot. That's the only difference. Yes, sir.
That's it then.
All right. I appreciate you guys very much. I really want to thank you. Your presence here tonight confirms my beliefs. You're very concerned about your community, and you're very concerned about the future of your law enforcement. And I think that's just outstanding. So thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate it.
We have a little bit of time. They're not going to kick us out till 9, so as we pick up stuff here, might take an opportunity to button the whole hand and find out some of the things that you didn't get answered. We want to thank you all for coming. The next meeting is August 18th, and we'll be talking to the candidates for county commission. Anything else, anybody? You're dismissed. Back up your action.